the idea was you have to eat carbs in order to burn carbs. And they say, okay, well, what about wolves? You know, they don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. You know, they just go. And they found that, you know, do they even have blood sugar? Do they even have glycogen? And they found out, yes, they do, but it's rock solid. You know, it doesn't change. And so no matter what they're doing at rest or an activity or after activity, it's very, very stable. And so this means that your body's constantly replenishing what they're using as a fuel source, which is great. And so I don't think you necessarily need to. I mean, you play with it yourself. If you feel better and you feel that that's giving you something, you know, go for it. But like you say, you know, fruit is seasonal. And fruit is also very different now. It's been you know, modified through, you know, selective breeding and GMO practices more recently to be very sweet. And so like a natural mango is not that sweet. It has a lot of fibrous components to it. It's very, very tough to eat, and it's got a big old seed. So it's not the same sort of thing as the mango that we would get at the store. And so that's certainly not what our ancestors, the mangoes that we have now, or even the apples that we have now, are different beasts compared to what we would have found in the wild seasonally. And the idea that we have to have these things. Now, if you want to have these things and you find that they benefit you somehow, I'd go for it. You know, like I feel great without them, and I feel that I perform the best with just pure meat. But you know, I've spoken to people, and they just really feel that that's something that adds to them in their workout. Fine, go for it. You know, that's I'm very much in favor of adults, you know, living their own life.
Hey friends, welcome back. So today's show with Dr. Anthony Chaffee is brought to you by our friends over at icebarrel.com, the makers of one of the most convenient and easy to use deliberate cold exposure tanks that you can put on your back patio, your porch, anywhere in your backyard. This contains 125 gallon capacity. It's made right here in the USA from recycled plastic. Now I know you can go on Amazon and probably find like just this cheap tub, but it's not the same, my friends. The first thing about that is it's hard to clean, and number two, it looks like crap. Number three, it doesn't have a cover, so you're gonna get leaves and bugs in there. That means you're not going to use it. And so that's one of the great things about Ice Barrel is this is really well engineered. It has a nice step going up to it. It has a nice cover, and it has a little nozzle to drain so you can easily clean this and keep it clean. That means you're more likely going to use it. That means your friends are going to want to come over and use it. That also means your wife is probably going to actually want to get in there. She's not going to want to get into the Rubbermaid tank with leaves and worms and bugs in there. I'm telling you, because I've done that before and I was the only one that was using it. And even once it started to get dirty, I didn't want to use it anymore. So invest in your health and get cold on purpose. There's a lot of metabolic health benefits that we talk about with Dr. Chaffee very soon about deliberate cold exposure, the immune supportive properties, how it's good for your metabolism, and much more. Again, that URL is icebarrel.com/HIH, and you can use the coupon code HIH where you can save $125 off this amazing at-home deliberate cold exposure tank. Now, in today's show with Dr. Chaffee, we get into the weeds with all things ancestral nutrition, the importance of protein, animal-based fats. We talk about cyclical carbohydrate intake. And what's unique about Dr. Chaffee's approach is he's a former professional rugby player. And so he used a zero-carb diet to enhance his recovery, to improve his body composition. And most importantly, I think what's great about his perspective is he's also a physician. He's a neurosurgical resident. And so he can speak to this from multiple levels, both from the athletic performance perspective, but also from the disease prevention perspective and the disease pathology. So he really knows the research, really knows the biochemistry. And I really sincerely hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Chaffee. So the links will be below to the timestamps and some of the articles we discuss, and also his YouTube channel. So let's dive into it with Dr. Chaffee.
Well, Anthony, it's great to be with you. It's fun to sauna with you.
Yeah.
So we did a sauna, and then went in the cold plunge. And describe sort of that lightheadedness. I think that's pretty interesting. You know, the physiology there as a neurosurgeon.
Well, yeah, it was very interesting to experience. Yeah, you know, so it was very, very cold plunge. Like, you know, I've done ice baths with rugby before, you know, just, you know, tipping a whole bunch of ice in there, but this seemed to be colder than that. And you just, yeah, it was great. You know, while you're in it, you end up, you know, dying slowly and go numb, and then you just sort of, you know, stop, you know, caring about your life, and then it feels more acceptable. But then once you get out, all of a sudden you start warming up enough to realize that you're freezing, and then you start, like, you know, shivering and shaking, and then I just got this sort of a euphoric lightheadedness, which was very interesting. I don't actually necessarily know what that's from. Probably just, you know, redistribution of blood, but it was quite nice. And then, you know, getting back into the sauna and warming up was awesome.
Yeah. But you still feel a little tingling, you were describing before.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, getting back to the sauna, we get very, very hot, sweating, your capillaries are opening up again, and you're just sort of getting this compression expansion of all these different vessels and capillaries. And so I was sweating and I was hot, and then we came out, but now I'm sort of like in the middle. So like my core is still a bit cool, but like the outside's warm. And so it's sort of, still equilibrizing. So it's equilibrating. So it's sort of weird. Yeah, it's sort of still sort of tingling in the hands and the legs. Yeah,
it's such a cool sensation. I mean, after doing something like that, I would never want to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs. I mean, I think people need to leverage these sort of more natural modalities, to calm down with stress and things like that. Just curious, because you've done so much extensive training. You're in your residency as a neurosurgeon. When you experience sort of physiologic phenomena like this, are you always thinking about which brain region is being turned on or turned off? Is that part of your day-to-day operation?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, sometimes you just, you don't know enough. Like on this one, like I was just like, well, that's interesting. It'd be cool to look into. But yeah, you do find that you always sort of, thinking about things like that in a more sort of like morbid sort of way. Like even like sort of when you're eating, you're like eating through and like, oh yeah, this is this muscle, this is this tendon. I'm like, I can't think like that. Like that's too weird. And, but yeah, just thinking about all that, like, is always very interesting when you know and understand the physiology. Like we were saying before, Professor Ben Bigman of BYU, he was talking recently about a study showing that, when you get very, very cold and you start to shiver, this signals your brown fat to actually make thyroid hormone. So it's actually putting out, thyroid hormone. It can create as much as even 50% of your total thyroid output. And so that's, the likely modality in increasing your metabolism. And that could be, part of the head rush. All of a sudden you're just flooding your body with a lot of thyroid hormone, and your metabolism's ramping up, and you're just getting ready to do things. So, I really do like the physiology side of things, and the anatomy side of things as well.
Yeah, that's cool. So you were a professional rugby player for 10 years, and then what inspired you to get out of that and then to go back to medical school? I think that's kind of, most people might be a rugby coach or a strength and conditioning coach because that's kind of comfortable, right? Yeah. And you decided to sort of pivot gears and then do that as an older student. I'm sure it's been a lot easier for you, but what inspired you to make that transition? Yeah.
Well, I always wanted to be a doctor. That was always the plan. And then I just had opportunities with rugby that I felt that I needed to take advantage of because they were, time sensitive. You can always go back to school, but you can't always, play sports at a high level. So I figured that while I had the opportunities to, I would take advantage of that. And, as we discussed earlier, I started, at college a bit early. And so I figured I was ahead of the game. And so I was like, well, I can, take a couple of years off and, play rugby. But then that sort of grew and, it took me over to Europe, and I was playing in England, and then, came back and I was playing in the, Super League and in the Premiership and in Canada and just was just enjoying that. I broke my leg before the 2003 World Cup. I wanted to just sort of get into that and then just do a World Cup and be like, oh, okay, I can
accomplish what I need to.
Yeah, exactly. And then still play, but just, not necessarily put off medicine. But I broke my leg right before that, so I wasn't able to compete for a spot on the 2003 World Cup. And that really, really devastated me. And that was actually when I decided to go across to England, because I was told, I was 22. I was told that it's like, yeah, you're not going to recover from an injury like this. You're not going to be playing international anymore. And you're not going to have your speed and all that. And I'm like, well, that's bullshit. We'll see about that. And so I went to England. I'm like, right, well, let's do this. And so I was able to walk on and make, one of the top teams there and was playing there, and then came back and was back in doing ITTs and regional select side for the Pacific Coast Grizzlies. We won that whole tournament, or the select, the all-star sort of tournament. And that was a selection criteria for the national team. And so again, I was in the running again for the national team sort of stuff at that point. And then I went back to England and was playing more. So I was able to recover from that injury. And then I was getting ready for the 2007 World Cup. I was playing with On back down in San Diego. And I was looking to get on that squad, and then I ended up breaking my hand, just sort of a metacarpal fourth metacarpal. Not in rugby. I was out with my girlfriend, my then girlfriend, and like 3 guys stole her purse, so I had to beat them up.
You had to get it back.
Yeah.
Don't mess with a rugby player.
Yeah. And so I ended up getting a fight with these guys, and I got the purse back and did fine in the fight, but I broke my hand in the process, and so that was kind of it. And I was enjoying my rugby, I was enjoying traveling, I was enjoying doing these things. I remember thinking to myself, like, this is something that so many people, this is this kind of lifestyle and things that so many people would love to do, but I was really not satisfied with it. I was really, really just uncomfortable that I wasn't in medical school, because that's something I had been dreaming about and working towards literally my entire life since I was a young child. And so I was thinking, I would actually be in England, where I was playing in this, amazing league with amazing players, in stadiums with screaming fans. And I would literally not sleep at night some nights because I was thinking, I'm like, I should be in medical school right now. I should be in medical school. Like, I should be finishing medical school. I should be a doctor now. I'd be in my second year of residency now. It was freaking me out. And so I was 27 when I broke my hand, and that was right before the 2007 World Cup. And I just said, right, that's it. I'm not gonna do this again and sort of delay medical school another 4 years to then break something else and not be able to play. And so, I decided that I'm still going to go to medical. I'm still going to keep playing rugby, but I'm going to get my ducks in a row. I hadn't taken my MCATs at the time until then. I was going to take my MCATs and get things going for medical school. I'll still play rugby. I'll still play at a high level, like in the top league in America, Super League. But my focus now is going to medical school. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was. I actually had to convince my medical school that I was going to. They were like, okay, well, how do we know you're not just going to like stop and go play professional rugby again and do this? I'm like, look, I've accomplished everything I wanted. I didn't get to the World Cup, but I've done basically everything else, and I've been able to do that. I'm satisfied with that, and I want to move on. Like, I'll still play rugby, like I'll always play rugby, but my focus now, my primary focus is medicine, and so that's what I did, and I continued playing rugby in medical school and beyond as well. But the last couple of years, I haven't really been able to, just with time.
Right. I mean, as a resident, you said some weeks are 130 hours. It's super busy.
Yeah.
Just a small sort of tangent to that story I would like to ask you about. You've played with all sorts of people of different ethnicities and backgrounds and things like that. Maybe Samoan folks. You mentioned you were in Europe. Is there any region that is known to be like the toughest, like the Nordic Rugby League or something? Like, is there people who are like, wow, those guys are just big and tough? Like, there's something in their genes or their blood. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the Islanders certainly, and like obviously, the New Zealand rugby. I mean, it's just a religion over there, and so the New Zealand All Blacks, they're always at the top of anything. They may lose a game here and there, or they may lose a World Cup here and there, but I don't think anyone would argue that they have been and are the best rugby nation and national team in rugby history for 15s anyway. And they're just fantastic, and they have a lot of there's a bunch of different ethnicities there, but they certainly have a large Islander population there. Very, very big, strong, athletic people that just bust their ass. All the Islanders are of a very, very different mentality, though. I grew up playing in the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of Islanders here that play rugby, and I loved it, because they're really trying to kill you. And they're really going after you. And so, I like that. I like that physical contest. I was always very much into the contact and the physicality of it. I was always a big hitter. I figured out early on that if I hit someone harder than they hit me, they took all the punishment. And so as a way of protecting myself, I just went in with just reckless abandon, because I knew that if I put everything into this, I was going to walk away unscathed. But if you see the people that go and kind of hesitate, they just get really hurt. And so I would go into contact situations with someone who's way bigger than me, some big charging Samoan, when I was like a skinny whip of a kid, and this is a full grown man, playing in these men's leagues when I was like 17. And I remember thinking in my head, I was just like, well, I may die here, but I'm going to take your ass with me. Mm-hmm. And going in with that mentality, I was able to, just knock them over and not feel anything, not get any of that brunt. But because these guys play so hard and they are absolutely trying to kill you. If you beat them and you hit them, you knock them down, you know that you beat them at their best. They did not dog it. You didn't beat them when they're kind of, they weren't really trying that hard. They are trying. They are trying to mangle you. And so if you beat them in that point of contact, that's an actual accomplishment. And so I've always really loved playing against that kind of player.
Yeah, that's awesome. You got into nutrition in college during undergrad. I'm curious to see like how is your nutrition now compared to how it was when you were playing pro rugby?
So it fluctuated because, when I was first starting out and playing, I was just eating what we were supposed to eat, mixed diet with, carbs and vegetables and protein and a bit of fat. And that's what I thought was normal. But then when I was in my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington in Seattle, I took a class on cancer biology. And so we were learning in cancer biology that plants use defense chemicals in order to protect themselves. And this is just a normal thing that any botany class will tell you. Anybody who studies horticulture or botany can certainly tell you this, that plants have different defenses because they're living organisms, and all living organisms have a defense against being eaten. And while animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. And so they need to use other methods. And one of those methods is by being actively poisoned, making defense chemicals. And this is something that can cause inflammation and screw with your body and your cells and precipitate cancer. So we call them carcinogens. So because this was cancer biology, we were looking at mostly from a carcinogen point of view. And we learned that Brussels sprouts had 136 known human carcinogens in them. White mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, you name it. They had 60, 80, over 100 known human carcinogens each, and they were quite abundant. We know from the work of Professor Bruce Ames at UC Berkeley, published a paper in 1989 showing the toxins in plants versus pesticides that were sprayed on them because they were trying to make pesticides illegal. They're saying, "Hey, these are poison. We shouldn't use these." He's saying, "Yeah, they are poison, but we've been using these for 80 years. We've never had a problem. So, let's take a look at it." And he found that just the toxins that they knew about at the time, which were not as many as I learned about in my undergrad, that there were 10,000 times more naturally occurring poisons in vegetables like spinach than in the pesticides that we sprayed on them by weight. And that the naturally occurring toxins were far more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we sprayed on them. So they were really a drop in the bucket. And this is why we still have pesticides, because they were trying to get them illegal, but they're like, no, actually, objectively, they aren't actually worse than the plant itself. And so if you want to eat the plant, then you shouldn't have any problem with the pesticide. And I think we're using sort of different ones now. The glycophosphates and things like that weren't, I don't think, tested at the time. So that might be a different argument. But certainly for what we were using at the time, they were specifically in that study, we're looking at alar, which is what they used for apples at the time. So obviously different things can be different. But either way, we were blown away by this. And, because your whole life you're getting told that, just vegetables are where you get all your nutrients. This is the most important thing you can eat. They're very, very healthy, and that meat's bad. And I remember thinking in my head, I was like, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And my professor just looked at us and he just sort of shook his head and he just said, "I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you." So I was like, right, screw plants. And I just stopped, and I defaulted into a carnivore diet just because I just did not want to eat plants. And so I went to the grocery store. I was like, well, everything has plants in it. Everything has vegetables. Everything has, grains or rice or whatever. And so I just defaulted in eating eggs and meat. And this was, while I was playing rugby, and my athletic performance and ability just went through the roof. It just absolutely shot to the stratosphere. I stopped drinking during the rugby season at the same time, and obviously that contributes. But again, alcohol comes from plants, so that's not that's sort of in line with that whole thinking as well. But I got to the point where I literally couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy, and I couldn't get sore. I don't get sore anymore. A lot of people on a carnivore diet or even a keto diet notice this. They get much less sore. And, I attribute this to different defense chemicals causing inflammation and soreness and irritability in your healing tissue that increases pain. And we see this in chronic pain patients as well, that, fibromyalgia is going away. They go on a carnivore diet or even keto, but carnivore seems to help more. getting rid of their fibromyalgia, getting rid of their radiculopathy, chronic pain in their shoulders, arthritis pain. People that, Dr. Sean Baker talks about how when he was just putting people on keto, they were getting ready to do like a total knee replacement, bone on bone arthritis. And then, a month before the surgery, they say, hey doc, like I'm not in pain. Like, I don't think I need surgery. Just from dietary changes. And so I certainly noticed that. Like, I always had very bad back pain, even as a teenager. And now all of a sudden I didn't have any. I could just sprint nonstop. I had to work up to it, obviously, but I did work hard. And so my fitness just spiked. And so I just had exponential gain. And I was able to push myself and get fit enough to the point that I actually couldn't wear myself out. I could just sprint and sprint and sprint and sprint and could not get tired. And I remember thinking the amount of work I was doing, I was like, I could probably just sprint a marathon and just win it. And I was thinking, I'm like, that might be cool. Just like break a world record on a first ever marathon. But like, I just thought the idea of just running for 26 miles is just the most boring thing ever. Yeah. And so I just never did it, but I fully regret it. And I remember thinking at the time, like, I'm going to regret this if I don't do it, because I will never be in this good of a shape again in my life. And I never will. And so like, it's, it is a shame that I didn't do that. But yeah, my performance went absolutely through the roof. I was able to, push myself and excel, far past anybody else that I was playing with or against. And this was, was commented on by people I was playing with. They were like, you just like, no one is as close to as fit as you, and can do the things that I could do. But it was when I went to England and was playing there, and I didn't really have the same access to food and meat. Some of the meat was breaded. And I sort of started thinking, is that big of a deal if it's breaded? And it did. It made a big deal, and it made a big difference. And I remember thinking a few months into it, like, why am I not feeling as like superhuman as I normally do? I didn't really know what was going on. I thought maybe I just wasn't working as hard or pushing myself. But that was the beginning of my decline, nutritionally, because I started slipping off things. I started with, breaded, crumbed meat because it was just easy and accessible. And then, I had maybe started putting some like ketchup on things. Then all of a sudden one day I thought like, maybe we can all make French toast. And I didn't even think about like, why you're doing that. That's a plant, and you just slip off of it. And then it wasn't until like sort of 5 years ago that I sort of, realized that, humans actually are carnivores. This is just the kind of animal that we are. And this is the way we should be eating. And then I look back and I'm like, that's what it was. That was the difference. And that's why I stopped feeling as good, is because I slipped off of it then. So now I'm back on it and I'm just feeling as good as I did in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing how just like one small meal, whether it's having cheesecake or ice cream or this, and then you sort of make these concessions. Well, I had that last night. So then today I can have the chocolate bar, the cookies. And then it's like just a snowball rolling downhill, picking up negative inertia in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it is good to be, maybe not a zealot, but to eat clean and to not sort of have these cheat days and things like that. Yeah.
Well, I think that, if you make an excuse once, you'll make it 1,000 times. If you say like, well, it's like little things, it's like, are you going to miss your kid's birthday? It's just like, well, I miss it this year because it's a good reason. Well, then there are good reasons to do anything. And if you find a reason to do something, you can find a reason again. Or like drinking, if people, don't want to drink, like I don't really drink anymore. But because I just feel so much better when I don't, and I prefer feeling great to feeling drunk sometimes. And, but sometimes I will, but it'll be for a very specific occasion. And it's not just kind of, someone twisted my arm, but you have to be very careful of that. And I would never drink during the rugby season, because again, like you make one concession, like you'll do it again. And so it was just hard ruled, no, during the rugby season, I will not drink at all. And when I did that, I was able to stick to it. And cheat days, I think, are, probably a bad idea, because a lot of people, have to, contend with like food addictions, and, carbohydrates are certainly addictive. Fructose actually is chemically addictive. It gives a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, meth, gambling. And we can measure this, and we can track this. And because dopamine is an excitatory molecule, it turns your neurons on. And when your neurons are on, they're actually being damaged, and they have to turn off cyclically to heal themselves. That's why sleep's so important. You can actually permanently damage or even kill different portions of your brain due to excess excitation. So this is how, when they say like, oh, you're going to, pop holes in your brain if you do these drugs, that's really what they're talking about, is that you're having this constant dopamine hit and you're just keeping these neurons firing all the time, and eventually they die off. And so we actually see in MRI studies that people that are addicted to methamphetamines, they kill these areas of their brain. Their functional MRIs, you give them a hit of amphetamines or whatever, this area of the brain will just barely twinkle. But you give that same dose of amphetamines to someone who's metabolically unwell, who's a sugar addict, same barely twinkle. So it actually kills the same areas of your brain as meth. So this is a real drug, and it's really addictive, even though it doesn't give us a big high. People think that, a drug is only as bad as the high it gives you, but that of course isn't true. Something can be very bad for you and not even get you high, like arsenic will just kill you. I haven't heard anybody, dosing arsenic for fun, but fructose is one of those. It's highly toxic. It's highly addictive. It breaks down into the same byproducts as alcohol. So it causes the same damage: fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, and it's even implicated in cancer and Alzheimer's. So this is a really, really bad drug. And so having a cheat day for a highly addictive, damaging drug, I think is a bad idea, because all you're going to do is just get yourself addicted again. It's going to make you want that more. You're going to be addicted again. Then for the next few days, you're going to be thinking like, oh, I really just want that drug. It's like having a cheat day for smoking or for cocaine. That's just called a weekend, I guess. You just do drugs on the weekend, but that's the same as a cheat day. You one day a week, you're eating all this crap, or you're doing drugs, or you're drinking alcohol, or you're smoking cigarettes, and so you do that on the weekends. Fine, that's better than not doing it every day. But what you're doing is you're keeping yourself addicted, and you're hating your life all throughout the week, and you're thinking about this. And by the time you're actually coming down off that, and you're actually probably getting to a point where you're not going to miss it too much longer, you re-addict yourself. And sometimes you'll binge on it because, this is my day, so I'm really going to go after it. So I think those are counterproductive, to have a cheat day, because after a couple of weeks, you stop having the addiction, and you can just move on with your life and just not miss it. Like I really don't care. Like I like candy, like who doesn't? But I don't miss it. I really don't care at this point.
It's a great way to reframe this hyperpalatable processed food, that it is really, there's an underlying addiction that's woven into that. Because, you during COVID especially, you would see Chick-fil-A and Jack in the Box. We're hearing about how this virus is disproportionately impacting obese and diabetic and hypertensive people. Yeah. But people would still feed their addictions by going to the fast food, which to me made no sense knowing the biology. But then I started to think, okay, well, people are still going to binge drink and do this. So there must be something or psychological here, an addiction of sorts. So yeah, I definitely want to speak to that more and talk about honey and fruit. Mm-hmm. But going back to sort of the to sort of putting a button on the physiology of rugby, you mentioned your recovery was better, and we encourage exercise so much. Do you think that you're just reducing sort of the background smoldering inflammation by eliminating some of that immunologic noise, so to speak, by getting rid of the processed foods and some of the plant chemicals, and that's why your recovery was better at that time?
Yeah, and I think that's the main factor there is, you're not limiting yourself. You're not getting all these plant toxins that are causing a whole bunch of inflammation and stopping your body from healing properly. And also you have an abundance of proper nutrition. You have a lot of fat and cholesterol and protein, and so you're giving your body exactly what it needs, and you're not giving it any of the crap that screws you up. And so it's that was a big difference for me. Like the day after a game, normally for me, I was just absolutely in pieces. I was sore because I would play very, very hard, and I would again be very, very physical. And so I really made it a point. There'd be some games I would play in the back row, so like 7 or 8. I really loved open side flanker. That was always my favorite position. But I would go at it in a very defensive mindset. And so I was really focused on just making as many tackles as I could and just really terrorizing people. So I would make sometimes, 30 to 40 tackles in a game at very high impact, and, and then running the ball and doing other sorts of things. And so that takes a lot of toll on their body. And I would sort of almost pride myself like how crippled I was, like the days after that, like that's how hard I was going. But it really did take a lot out of you. And it was very painful and difficult to just be alive and go to school and do anything. And so once I switched to that, like the next day, all of a sudden I was feeling better. I was like, I can go for a workout. Whereas it was usually until like the Tuesday that I was still recovering. And especially if we would go out drinking after the game, like I would only drink that one day a week, but I would still be like feeling like I was running booze out of my system, like on the Tuesday night practice. And then after that, I'm just starting to get back to normal. So it took a long time to get this stuff out of my system. And I basically have recovered from the damage I did to myself on that Saturday night by the Saturday game. And so just by eliminating that nonsense out, the alcohol out certainly, but also the rest of the plants, like Sunday, I was feeling better, and I was feeling really good. And actually, not only did I not feel as damaged, but I actually felt like I was already improved. Like Saturday was a really good workout, and now I'm already stronger. And then Monday I was even stronger, and Tuesday I was stronger and faster. And so, I think that it has a lot to do with what not to eat as much as what to eat, because I see a lot of people now that I help out or talk to online. They're saying that like, oh, well, I'm doing this carnivore diet, but I'm not getting the same results you are. Oh, I wish I would. And you talk to them, and quite often they think of a carnivore diet as you're just eating a lot more meat, and that's great. That's certainly part of it. But they're still having some things that they shouldn't, and they're sort of holding back their results. And just a little bit actually ends up doing a lot physiologically and metabolically. And so it's just sort of eliminating out those last little bits. Then all of a sudden they get this explosion in results. So even a little bit of these plant chemicals and obviously very little carbohydrates will derail your metabolism and get you out of your primary metabolic state, which is taught to be a fasting state, which I disagree with. I think that's our primary metabolic state. I think that's where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear. That's the biochemical position of most animals in the wild, and including humans who are just eating carnivore, like the Inuit and so forth. But eliminating out the last vestiges of plant toxins and carbohydrates, I think make a huge difference. Yeah. And so that takes a huge toll on your body. And so, that is probably one of the most important parts of recovery.
And usually, obviously it varies person to person, but what would examples of those foods be for people? Is it fruit? Is it grains? Is it sweet potatoes? Like, what do you find? Is there any commonalities with that?
So quite often, people will still have little things, and like have coffee. A lot of people like coffee, and they'll like sweeten it with different sorts of things. A lot of people will have like different sort of treats with a lot of artificial sweeteners, and I think that's a hard one for people to give up. Or even energy drinks. A lot of people like energy drinks, and it gives them energy, but these things do other things in their body as well, and obviously they have a lot of artificial sweeteners. And then there's been a rise in people eating fruit and honey, and having just fruit, honey, and meat. And that's nice. I'm sure that's enjoyable, but the fructose is a harmful, addictive substance, and it causes harm in your body. And so I don't think that that's necessarily the right thing to do. In fact, I feel very strongly that it's the wrong thing to do, because it's it's still fructose. And so people will argue, well, in the matrix of the fruit, maybe it's better, but there's actually no objective evidence to suggest that that's the case. That's just something that someone said because they hoped it was true, probably, but there's no actual evidence for that. And in fact, there was a study that just came out that Dr. Baker told me about, that they put people on isocaloric diet, and they just had one group, and it was a randomized control trial, where they had one group eat 4 more pieces of fruit a day, and the other one eat less than 2 a day. And these were people who already had metabolic disease and fatty liver. So it's a specific cohort. But in the group that was eating the same amount of calories but eating more fruit, they had worsening of their metabolic syndrome. They had worsening of their fatty liver disease. So the idea that fructose in fruit or honey somehow acts differently is well, it's just not borne out by the evidence, and it's has nothing necessarily to suggest that it's so. I know Dr. Saladino said that he was in a discussion with Dr. Gundry from the plant paradox, and Gundry was saying, look, fructose is really bad. It's a bad guy, and Paul said that he challenged me and said, okay, well, can you show me a study that shows that the fructose in honey and fruit are as bad as, the fructose in table sugar or whatever? And I was like, oh, I don't have one. And I was like, okay, but do you have a study showing that it's not as bad as the other ones? So there's no evidence one way or the other, but actually now there is evidence showing that the fructose in fruit is causing worsening metabolic syndrome, worsening fatty liver disease as well, versus less fruit isocaloric. And so, I think that is a major one that's holding people back. I've spoken to a lot of people, because this is an addictive substance, a little bit of fruit and honey can turn into a lot of fruit and honey very quickly. And that is a very big problem. And so I've spoken to a lot of people over the years who have listened to that advice and say, oh, I can eat fruit and honey. Like, okay, I'll do that. And then they start eating a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then all of a sudden they start eating grains again. They're eating pasta. And within 6 months, they're eating pizza and ice cream on the couch, and they've gained all the weight back, and they've got all the health issues back again. And they don't even realize how they got there. And so I think a lot of people, especially that come to a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet through looking for a better outlet because they have some sort of serious chronic illness or food addiction, I think it's vitally important for them to really steer clear of these sorts of things, because it can really lead you down a bad path.
Yeah, it's a good point, because a lot of people do come into this because they were morbidly obese or have a lot of excess fat to lose, and being aware of that'd be analogous to telling someone who was an alcoholic, like, hey, look, you can drink on Saturdays, man. You're good.
That's it.
Monday through Friday. And so we need to be aware of the that addictive element, which is important. Some people would say, I will have fruit periodically, mostly if it's in season, like when berries come in season, but it's not like a staple, especially I'm not going to have like dried mangoes in January. When we have some apples, I'll eat that. But it's really, for me, and I would love you to critique me, it's around exercise. So for hiking, if I'm doing a lot of working out, maybe I'll have like an apple in the post-exercise window, or bring some on a hike with me or something. So that's sort of the context that it's in. But I feel like a lot of people are not exercising enough to sort of metabolize any of these things. What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, well, I think that's if you're going to do it, that's certainly the way to do it. And fructose has been shown to be one of the better ways of replenishing your liver's glycogen levels. So it's a very quick way of doing that. But when you're on a carnivore diet, or even a ketogenic diet, your body's going to be replenishing your liver glycogen, muscle glycogen pretty much constantly. There were studies from wolves back in 1981 looking at this, and the idea was you have to eat carbs in order to burn carbs. And they say, okay, well, what about wolves? They don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. They just go, and they found that do they even have blood sugar? Do they even have glycogen? And they found out yes, they do, but it's rock solid. It doesn't change. And so no matter what they're doing at rest or an activity or after activity, it's very, very stable. And so this means that your body's constantly replenishing what they're using as a fuel source, which is great. And so I don't think you necessarily need to. I mean, you play with it yourself. If you feel better and you feel that that's giving you something, go for it. But like you say, fruit is seasonal. And fruit is also very different now. It's been modified through selective breeding and GMO practices more recently to be very sweet. And so like a natural mango is not that sweet. It has a lot of fibrous components to it. It's very, very tough to eat, and it's got a big old seed. So it's not the same sort of thing as the mango that we would get at the store. And so that's certainly not what our ancestors, the mangoes that we have now, or even the apples that we have now, are different beasts compared to what we would have found in the wild seasonally. And the idea that we have to have these things. Now, if you want to have these things and you find that they benefit you somehow, I'd go for it. I feel great without them, and I feel that I perform the best with just pure meat. But I've spoken to people, and they just really feel that that's something that adds to them in their workout. Fine, go for it. Right. I'm very much in favor of adults living their own life. But the idea that you have to have carbohydrates, that you have to have fruit or honey, that to me I think is a big stretch, because the people living in the ice ages did not have access to fruit or honey. And and people say, oh well, people were mostly living towards the equator. No, they weren't. There's a lot of archaeological evidence of actually, after we came up with fire, people migrating north during the ice ages. Dr. Bill Schindler, who, we saw at KetoCon, he was talking about this very specifically. And that is what the fossil record shows, is that when the ice was coming down, humans were moving up, and so there was no fruit and honey going up, but there were mammoths, and they liked mammoths. And, people crossing the land bridge across the, the Bering Sea from Russia over to Alaska to populate North America, where was the fruit and honey there, So the idea that you need it is completely fictitious. If you want it, go for it. But, the argument that, you're going to screw up your thyroid, you're going to get electrolyte imbalances, you're going to mess with your hormones. Well, then how did we exist during the ice ages going north? And how are the Inuits alive now? How am I alive now? Low thyroid is devastating. It can be fatal. And when a pregnant woman has low thyroid, that is very, very damaging to the child. You get a condition called cretinism, which is very obvious. They have short stature. They have physical changes to their facial characteristics, and they have a very low intelligence. It really damages the development of their brain. And so, and you call someone like, you cretin or something, that's what they're referring to. Like, all the best insults are actually like medical terms and things like that. Like idiot, that actually means someone who has an IQ in the range between 0 and 30. Imbecile is 30 to 50. And then moron was 70 to 90 or something like that. And, 50 to 70 or something like that. Yeah. And so now, and that's like been all the insults. Now they've changed those since then because they've had these negative, stigmas and things like that. But so that cretinism is a very devastating congenital condition. You would have an entire population of people with cretinism in those conditions if carbohydrates cause that. But you don't, and you have these people living generationally and perpetually without that. And so that's clearly not happening. So that doesn't even really pass the smell test. And they're, with all the different, WHO guidelines on eating and all these different sorts of, governmental recommendations, all of these people are still agreed that there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. You do not have to eat carbohydrates at all in your life. There are multitudes of examples of entire civilizations that have never eaten carbohydrates. So that's certainly not the case. You do not have to eat carbs. And I would argue that you're better off without them. But if you want to eat them, great. But you certainly don't have to have them.
It's such a good point. I mean, if you look at the sort of the etiology of hypothyroidism, a lot of it is autoimmune, caused by poor food choices. It's not eating, pasture-raised eggs and ghee butter and ribeye, right? Yeah. So a lot of people that that receive medical benefit or therapeutic nutrition lifestyle benefits, it's by omitting some of these foods, eggplant or tomatoes or things like that. Which leads me to suggest and confirm what you were saying is we're removing that smoldering background inflammation, allowing the immune system to self-regulate and have tolerance and not attack its own tissue like the thyroid. So you bring up a great point on that. I
was just going to make a quick point on the thyroid. Like you say, like it can be autoimmune driven. We see, I have a number of patients with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and there's a lot of people that come to functional medicine clinics because they're just a little off. They're having weight problems and things aren't just working right. Quite a lot of these have underlying Hashimoto's, like a number of them, a lot more than you would sort of expect. But that's sort of selecting for a particular population that are really having trouble losing weight. There's something wrong, and so. We find that there's a number of these people have Hashimoto's or even developing Hashimoto's, and we have since put them on a carnivore diet. All of them have recovered or beginning to recover. Obviously, they're in different stages, but every single one that we have put on a carnivore diet has made significant improvements. Reduced their antibody level and gained functionality in their thyroid as well. There was Dr. Paul Mason out of Sydney, who I think has a lot of great videos on like low carb down under. Well, I'll be actually speaking at this later this year in Gold Coast. he had a great lecture on lectins and how these can actually be precipitating the autoimmune issues. You know, they get into your body, you know, via, you know, leaky gut. And so now they're physically in your body. They're not supposed to be there, should just pass right through. But now your body recognizes these things as harmful. They're creating antibodies towards them. And because these things are similar enough to some people with certain genetics, that they are then, you know, through molecular mimicry now attacking you know, part of your body as well. And so you get this spillover effect, you know, attacking the lectin, and now those things are still in your system, and so they're attacking that part of your body as well. And by removing these lectins, not eating these things, healing your leaky gut, all of a sudden your body's not trying to create antibodies for those lectins. Now you don't have a whole bunch of antibodies in your body, and they're not attacking your thyroid or you know, causing Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or anything like that. And so I thought that was quite interesting as well as a physiological mechanism for autoimmune.
That's huge. And then translating that to the brain, the neuroinflammation, that's an area that I know you studied a lot about. And as a neurosurgeon, you know, you're going in and is it laparoscopic, or you're like making incision in the actual skull? And then is that a lot of like your day-to-day stuff as a physician?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a number of different things. You certainly can go endoscopically. There are some procedures that you do. You sort of do like a burr hole, like just a little hole in the bone there. And then, you know, depending on what you're doing, you would you know, pass a little you know, probe through. It'll be blunt. If you sort of put a needle through, it will cut its way through and damage all the cells in between, which is pretty devastating, can cause bleeds. But if you have it rounded, blunted, and you push through, it actually just pushes a lot of the cells and axons to the side, and so it causes less damage. I mean, I'm sure they're damaging things, but they're much less damage. Because the brain is very soft. It's like soft serve. You know, once you get past the sacs around the brain, the dura, which are quite tough. Once you get into the actual brain itself, it's literally like soft serve ice cream. I mean, you can just push through without any effort. It's just mush. Wow. Yeah. And so you pass this probe through, and then you can sort of, through that same track, put your endoscope, which is, you know, probably 0.5 centimeter wide. And then you go in, then you're in the ventricles, which is the hollow spaces inside the brain, which is where the cerebral spinal fluid would form. And you go in there, and you can sort of look around and grab things if you want. If you're doing something in the ventricles, that's a good approach for that. Otherwise, you might have a different approach. If you're going for a tumor and you're trying to resect the tumor, then you make a bigger incision and a craniotomy. It's just taking out a bony window. However big for what you're doing, and you take that off, you get through the dura, and then you're able to get into the brain and sort of, you know, use bipolar and sort of cauterize around the tumor and try to bring that sucker out en bloc. And it's or you have like traumas, then you have different sorts of approaches for that. You might have to, like, you know, take off, do like a hemicraniectomy, where you do like a very big incision, like a question mark down on the side of the head, and then you take off all of the bone on that side, and you sort of get at this acute bleed. Because when you bleed, you know, we think of blood as liquid, but of course it coagulates, and so it turns into this big clot. And so if it's new blood, it's just this big thick clot, and you have to take off. You can't just pop a little hole and just drain blood, because it's just thick. So you have to take off a big chunk of bone so you can get all this thick clot, so it's not compressing the brain. Because again, the brain is very soft, and so even, you know, congealed blood is enough to compress the brain. You know.
That is wild. Just curious. I have another friend, Ryan, who's a neurosurgeon. He was really into video games in high school. Yeah. Did you play video games at all? Like, his hand dexterity is like next level, because a lot of neurosurgery is like robotic and things like that. Was that part of your forte, or?
I did actually play video games. Yeah, I did like video games. Obviously, now, I can't really do that just because I do enjoy them. Like, it just takes so much time, and I just don't have time. Especially now with like the podcasting and things like that on top, and trying to write up papers in a book and all that stuff. Like, if I just started playing video games again, I just wouldn't be able to get anything done.
Time suck.
Yeah, but I've always liked video games, and I've had that hand-eye coordination as well. Yeah, I'm sure that's helped with that as well. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I guess the question now where I was going with this is the histology of the brain. If someone has a lifetime of metabolic disease, fatty liver, congestive heart failure, atherosclerosis, is that sort of recognizable when you get into the brain? Can you sort of see, just as a gross observation, an unhealthy brain versus a healthy brain, or is gray matter? Like,
I mean, you can see different manifestations. Generally, when you're looking at unhealthy brain, you have like a bleed or compression, it's bruised, and it's disease, and there's like a tumor under there. That's when you'll see distinctive visual differences. But you actually see actual browning of the bone in older people or sick people, and browning of the brain as well. It's called the Maillard reaction, where you're actually glycating and oxidizing like these different things. Like when you cook and you brown something, it browns it. That's Maillard reaction, and we actually do this to ourselves. So you have someone who has who hasn't really been taking care of themselves. Someone who's like a kid, bone is like bright white. It's clean, it's white, it's pristine. You're like, that's a healthy looking bone. And then you get someone who's older, they've been smoking and drinking and not really taking care of those. That's actually browned. The bone itself is brown and yellowed. And so you can certainly see those sorts of things, when you get in the body.
Does it smell different as you're cutting into the skull? Can you kind of tell an unhealthy person by just the smell, or is it all?
I haven't really noticed that myself, but you probably could, but not that I've known so far, but I'll take a look for that.
It'd be interesting to see. But I think one of the more sort of fatal forms of cancer, really, we were talking about glioblastoma multiforme. Is that
multiforme? Yeah, or just GBM.
GBM. 5-year survival rate is like single-digit percentage, right? But what we talked about, Thomas Seyfried and other people are using a metabolic approach to sort of ameliorate all the issues that are associated with that. Can you speak to how our metabolism? I mean, to me, it's just fascinating that you can change your diet, and then that improves the capacity of the body to recover from this really fatal tumor.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, as Professor Seyfried would say, if you understand the cancer biology to it, it's actually, it's not that difficult to imagine that this plays a huge role, or even that, know that it's going to play a huge role. Because, as he argues, and he makes a very, very strong case for it, is that cancer is actually a metabolic disease. It's not a genetic disease. A good example of this, which I've pointed out and noticed, is that, since we made these massive dietary changes in the 1980s, we vilified meat and fat and started eating, we reduced our fat intake by 30% and cholesterol by 30%, reduced red meat by 33% or so, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, as well as grains and sugar as well. And, since then, all these different diseases, so-called chronic diseases, have increased. The obesity rate tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rates have tripled. Type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even neurodevelopmental delays such as autism have all increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist before then. Now they're the only things we treat. So that's not genetic, and they all increase at the same time, and so that's very suspicious, and I would bet that you would say that this is very likely to be diet related, but it is something happened in our environment. You as a population, if anyone who studied population genetics know that you cannot change a population's genetics like that in that short of time, even a number of generations. I mean, you need hundreds or thousands of generations to do something that dramatic genetically. So it's something in our environment. And so that means that something in our environment has affected our cancer rates, because our cancer rates have tripled. So it's not purely genetic, is it? Or maybe we're just getting exposed to so many more carcinogens that destroy our genetics. Maybe, but no one's really, shown that we've been doing it. We're getting less sun than we ever have. We're very conscious about, what we eat in the wrong direction, I'd say. We're smoking less, we're, drinking less, all these sorts of things, people are much more conscious about, and they're still getting these things. So Dr. Seyfried argues that this is really a disruption of our mitochondria. This is from a metabolic issue. We do know that people who go on a ketogenic diet, or just are in ketosis, their mitochondria are more healthy. They're better at oxidative phosphorylation, and they have more number. So they have like 4 times the number, and they're like 4 times as effective. So they're much, much better. They're giving you much better energy. When you get damaged mitochondria, and they stop being able to go through oxidative phosphorylation, they go back to one of our primitive modes of energy generation, when life was still a single-celled organism, which was fermentation. And so they start fermenting glucose. And so they need a lot more glucose because it's not as efficient. And they'll start making lactic acid and the other byproducts. And so they'll actually need 400 times the amount of glucose. So you can screw up your mitochondria in a number of different ways. And once they get to that point where they're not going back and they're only fermenting, then you can get pretty screwed, because it's the mitochondria that actually can then kick off reactive oxygen species that then damage your DNA. So he argues that this is actually an effect, an epiphenomenon of the damaged mitochondria, not that they started, the genetics started it and then the rest happened. That it was the mitochondria first. And then, which we see, like in tumors, like it's not just, all the cells don't just have the same genes. They're all different, and a lot of them have normal DNA and they act like cancer. The mitochondria are all screwed. The mitochondria are the gatekeeper. The mitochondria are what stop the cell from proliferating out of control, which is what cancer is. So when you get those damaged and screwed up, then you're going to be precipitating cancer. But when you go back on a keto diet or a carnivore diet, you are now severely limiting the food supply of those cancer cells, because they need 400 times the amount of glucose to just run, right? And we've known this since like the 1930s with Otto Warburg, who won the Nobel Prize in medicine for this research into cancer. And he argued then that this was a metabolic disease driven by the mitochondria. And Seyfried has actually proven, he has over 150 peer-reviewed papers on the subject. And he's actually showed that Warburg was right. And there's actually more to it than that, because there's glutamine, which is the most abundant amino acid in the body. This is actually something that cancers feed on as well. So you can take things like DAWN, which is an acronym for a large chemical name that I don't remember at the moment, that can actually limit the amount of glutamine. So this really, really works at suffocating and starving out these cancer cells. So when you go on a keto diet or a carnivore diet, you are really limiting the amount of energy that these cancer cells can get. So they're not going to be able to proliferate as well. Your body works just fine, because your body works on, you're still at normal glucose levels, blood sugar levels, glycogen levels, but also now you have a bunch of ketones. So you're working great. Cancer cells cannot run on ketones because their mitochondria are screwed. And so they get severely limited by this. And your body is much better able to contain and kill these little bastards, which is trying to do the whole time. And you're also, not continuing this metabolic process of screwing up your mitochondria and your other cells, and contributing to the whole problem. And so, he's shown in animal models that this is very, very, very effective way of treating cancer. And there are different groups around the country and around the world that are actually picking this up. Cedars-Sinai have actually started doing this and treating people metabolically, these metabolic treatments for cancer. Now, it is the rule that you have to exhaust traditional therapies first, chemoradiation first, before you get to go on to metabolic therapies. But, if someone just says, yeah, I'm not doing that crap, it's their body, they get to choose it. And so a number of people have. He's done a lot of research with GBM, which is the most aggressive form of primary brain tumor. And it's with treatment, without treatment from time of diagnosis is average 3-month life expectancy. With treatment, traditional treatment, chemotherapy and radiation, at the moment, the numbers are about 15 months. There are some new things coming out, new numbers coming out, probably looking closer to 2 years. That's great. But, published numbers right now are around 15 to 18 months from time of diagnosis. But you have people that Seyfried knows, and these people have been treating metabolically. They've never taken treatment. They've never taken chemo and radiation. They're still alive 8 years down the track. They've had surgery for debulking, but being just on keto, not even like carnivore, but like dirty carnivore sort of keto sort of thing, they're still, being alive and kicking 8 years down the track. And I have a friend, these are all anecdotal, obviously, but there's a ton of animal models that show that this is exactly what we're seeing. And, and it's just a matter of doing those studies in people. But I have a friend of mine that I sort of just said, hey, here's the research, here's some information, take a look at this. I really think this would help you. She was diagnosed with GBM about 6 years ago, and she's still here. She's got a husband and kids, and she's living a fairly normal life. She, at her 5-year check MRI, she had no sign of disease, which is amazing. I don't know if she stopped being as strict. She was sort of dirty. She would sort of go back and forth, but a lot of it, what she was doing was meat, and she did sort of take what I was saying to heart. And then sort of at 6 years, it started to come back, and so she needed to get like a further debulking. But 6 years is absolutely unheard of for a GBM, and especially to be, completely functional and home with your kids as well. Amazing. Yeah.
That's so cool. I mean, this should be front page news, but some people have this perception that we're all family and friends who would say, well, I can never just go on a carnivore diet, or I can never, what about bread? What about cookies? It's like, well, you can eat those foods and you're not going to live as long. It's amazing, the addictive, going back to what we were talking about with honey or fruit or fructose. Like, we have these rituals and habits and, sort of connection to this food that some people would rather live a shorter lifespan than live without those things. Like, it's wild, which leads me to a question that I would love to dive further into is you retain a really good physique and you're strong and everything like that. What do you currently eat? How many meals a day? Are you tracking protein? Do you include organs? Like, there's all sorts of ways to go about it. What's your personal approach?
Yeah, I almost exclusively eat just skeletal muscle meat and fat. I don't really eat too many organs, mostly through preference. Just they're not really what I want. I don't think you need them. I mean, I've been doing this 5 years in my early 20s, and the last 5 years now. I've eaten liver twice in the last 5 years. I don't think I ate liver at all before that. And I look at like people like the Inuit who didn't eat the organ meat, certainly didn't eat the liver, because the liver of marine mammals was highly toxic for its vitamin A levels. So even just eating a little bit of polar bear liver will kill you with the amount of vitamin A that it has in there. Seals are sort of just below that. Like there's a step up the food chain with the polar bears, because the polar bears are eating the seals, and so they have even more vitamin A, which stores in your liver, is fat soluble. It takes a long time to clear. And so they wouldn't eat that at all. They'd give that to their dogs. And, I know that if people are proponents of eating organ meat and livers, and fine, they say, oh, look at wolves, alpha wolf goes, directly for the liver and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, maybe, but, we're not dogs. We're not wolves. We do know that in our relationship with dogs and wolves going back thousands and thousands of years, traditionally they got the organs, and we got the meat. Lewis and Clark, the expedition across, America, they actually were talking about the same thing. They were hunting, they were eating meat, and they found that the people that fat was really, really the survival driver. So those who were getting more lean, weren't getting enough fat, they were dying. They were dying on this expedition. And so what they were doing is they were giving the lean cuts and they were giving the organs to the dogs that they were with, and they were going for the fattiest part, and those were the guys who survived. So I don't think that objectively you need organ meat. I don't think you need it. I also don't think that you need it in the proportions that some people get, because obviously if you're hunting an animal and you take down an animal, you have a liver, one liver for hundreds of pounds of animal meat, and so that's a very, very different proportion. So, if I took down a cow and I bought a cow from a butcher, that's going to feed me and my family for like a year or more. It's going to come with one liver, and so eating liver in a significant proportion every single day is out of proportion with what I would find if I was just hunting. So the idea of this, they would just eat nose to tail, isn't actually necessarily true. But even if it is, that's a very specific proportionality. But the Native Americans would traditionally, when they hunt, they would take down an animal and they would gut it, they would dress it, and they would actually cut off the hindquarters, and they would hang those up as like an offering to the spirits or whatever. But really, I mean, look at this. This was the leanest part of the animal. They were hanging those up, and they would take down the forequarters and the steaks, and and they would take that back. They often didn't pack back the organs, But animals that eat, go for the belly, say, oh, they're going for the organs. They're going for the organs. Well, are they, or are they going for the belly fat, which is the bacon, which has the most fat in the body. And there's a ton of abdominal fat, intra-abdominal fat. The omentum is just fat, and all this fat around the organs. So I would argue that they're probably going for the fat more than the organs, but either way, I don't think that we need organs. And if you're going to have organs, think about that proportionality, because even with a cow liver, eventually you can get vitamin A toxicities, and those are bad. Vitamin toxicity is just as bad as the vitamin deficiency. They can both be fatal. They can both cause serious harm. So mostly I'm just eating steaks, brisket, mostly beef. And I often will just eat once a day. So I'll eat just like a very big fatty meal until I'm full at night. And if I'm able to do that, I'm generally not hungry for like another 24 hours. Unless I'm very active and I'm working out a lot, lifting weights a lot, then I will find that my body just wants more, and I'll have, basically twice as much. So I'll usually double that. So I'm usually about, 2.5 pounds of fatty beef a day. And if I'm working out a lot, I might eat 4 to 5 pounds of meat in a day. And and that, when I'm able to do that, I can just stack on a lot of weight, when I'm working out as well, which is great.
And how much are you training on average in the gym and stuff like that?
Yeah. When I can, I try to go 4 days a week. And then when I get into a rhythm, maybe I'll even go like 5 or 6 days a week. And I really try to push myself as hard as I can. If I don't have much time, no matter what I do, every set that I do, I'm always going to failure. If I have a spot, I'll go like, 3-4, reps past failure. And that's always great to be able to do that. And I find that is the most effective way of getting gains. I've worked out with a lot of people over the years that were, professional level athletes, and other people that were, just, wanted to work out, for fun, or for just to stay in shape and look good. And, the ones that get real results are those people that you just push yourself until you're exhausted. Nutrition is obviously very important as well. But I've worked out with people that just sort of do, 10 reps of something. They go, oh yeah, that was good. Oh, that felt good. But like, it was easy for them, and I find that if you are able to do 12 reps, if you can squeak out 12, but you stopped at 10, like you're really holding yourself back. I consider those last 2 the actual workout. Muhammad Ali said, they asked him, like, oh, how many, sets do you do? How many reps do you do? How many of these do you do? And he said, I have no idea. Like, I don't count. I get to the point that I'm tired. Then I start counting to see how many more I can push myself to do. And so that's where you'll get the real results. And so when I'm able to work out, that's what I try to do. So I try to at least go 4 days a week, and put in extra days where I can, and then just going really, really hard. But with my schedule, it's been a lot less than that. Sometimes it's only like maybe once a week or maybe even once a month. Wow. And obviously it's very dependent on work. Yeah.
Yeah. That's got to be tough. Yeah, you're putting in big, long weeks, and things like that. But I'm glad, going back to the liver, I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, that's something that I talk about a lot to clients that I'm working with, because liver has been touted to be the superfood, and we all have to have desiccated liver capsules, and you have to cook it every single day. But you're right. If you've ever harvested or processed an animal, you get hundreds of pounds of muscle, meat, and like maybe a 2 to 3 pound liver, depending upon, the size of the animal. Right. Yeah. And then the gurus on the internet are telling us we have to have this every single day. You'd be taking out a lot of animals to sustain that, which is not really realistic. So I love how you frame that and put language to helping people to conceptualize that. That's not to undermine some of the health benefits that could be achieved through having liver, but it's like, put it in context.
Well, but also it's like, when you're on a carnivore diet or even a keto diet, like you just need a different constellation of nutrients. And you'll actually need less of these things just for a lot of different reasons, For instance, like, our RDAs for vitamin C to stave off scurvy is 10 milligrams a day to not get scurvy, right? But when you're not eating carbohydrates and you're not eating plants, you actually need it in nanograms versus milligrams, all right? So this is the obscenely different amount that you need. And so if you're eating a mixed diet and you're eating a bunch of processed crap that don't have many nutrients and probably block a lot of nutrients and make it so that you need more of these basic nutrients, liver is probably your best friend. That's probably the only thing keeping some people alive. But when you're on a keto or carnivore diet, you really don't. And so this can become an excess very quickly. And certainly, eating supplements, why would you need supplements? If we're arguing that this is our natural, biologically appropriate, species-specific diet, you should not have to take any supplements whatsoever. Because, if you need supplements just to get basic nutrition, then by definition, your diet is deficient in those nutrients. And so, if you're eating naturally, it's not going to be by definition. So yeah, I certainly don't think you need to take supplements or anything like that. And, coincidentally enough, usually the people really pushing, that you have to take supplements to eat liver are usually the guys selling the supplements for liver, which is fine. I'm a big fan of people putting their money where their mouth is, and they believe in something like, hey, this is good for people. I'm going to start an industry behind it. I'm really all for that. I hope more people get involved in creating, products in the carnivore space and the keto space to help people get healthy. I'm all for that. But at the same time, there might be a conflict of interest there. And I certainly don't think, if you're eating a mixed diet though, fine. A liver supplement might be right up your alley, but not if you're just doing a carnivore diet.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So you have a podcast and YouTube channel as well. And I heard you writing a book, yeah?
Yeah. So, my podcast is called just The Plant-Free MD, just sort of harkening back to how I sort of got started on this, just by avoiding plants. And that's on, every podcast channel. And then I have a YouTube channel just under my name, Anthony Chaffee MD. And that's where I put all my videos as well. And Instagram is the same, Anthony Chaffee MD. And yeah, I am trying to write a book. I'm in the process of it at the moment, just arguing, just making these same sorts of arguments, but not trying to, be boring, because other people have already sort of done that. But also really going into plant toxins as well from, my perspective on it. And then more specifically, the overarching theme is arguing that the so-called chronic diseases that we're treating now in the world as doctors and practitioners are not actually diseases per se. That they're in fact toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet, and a lack of species specific nutrition. So, in short, too many plants, not enough meat, right? And so chronic diseases such as heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune issues, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, at least some forms of Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative changes, but even autism. Autism has a very strong relationship with food as well. There's a number of studies that show this, and even causative ones. If you don't get enough carnitine, your brain doesn't develop properly, and you can develop a certain kind of autism. There's a number of different causes for different kinds of autism, but that's one of them. And so you get carnitine from meat. You especially get it from red meat. And so vegans and vegetarians are having much higher rates of kids with autism if they have this deficiency in carnitine. And so I argue that these chronic diseases aren't diseases. Most of them are poisoning. And that instead of treating this as a disease model and giving a medication for this, we need to recognize this. If someone has, it's like, in ancient Rome when they had lead pipes and everyone had sort of low-grade lead poisoning. And they, people are just getting sick and having all these problems, and this is just how you age. This is just normal. And they're maybe getting medicines for that. And then someone actually figured out, no, we're being poisoned. This is from the pipes. And they got rid of the pipes, So that's what we need to do. So these are our lead pipes is vegetables and processed foods and crap like that. And so we need to recognize this as a poison model, and we need to remove the poison, and we will stop being poisoned. And then we need to get the proper nutrition as well.
I love that. It's a great way for people to reframe that because this, especially, it's poison in many different ways, from the food packaging, to all the chemicals in the actual food, and then, what it does metabolically. It's insane. So I love the approach and love the message. Anthony, really appreciate you coming on the show. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, not a problem, man. Thank you for having me.